Okay, students, welcome to the final webinar for the Project Management Series. This is the Assessment Support Workshop. So like with all our subjects, our final webinar for each subject is what we call our Assessment Support Workshop. By the end of this lesson, you'll have all of the information that you need to successfully complete all of the assessment tasks. There are 3 assessment tasks with this particular subject, Project Management. By the end of this session, I would have taken you through all of the requirements, all of the ways that I'm going to be looking and assessing your work, and what it is you actually need to do to complete those tasks successfully. So remember, this is the 4th installment. The previous 3 webinars cover all of the learning activities and all of the material. So for information relating to scoping, stakeholders, planning and preparation, any information relating to project risk and budgeting, rollout, resourcing, project success and project lessons, please refer to the earlier webinars for those ones. I'm not going to recap the information per se. We will be touching on it as we go through each of these assessment tasks. So this should be a nice short one today. And by the end of this session, you'll have all the information you need to hand in some successful submissions there for your assessment tasks here. Let's just jump straight into it. The very first one, so if you click on assessment task 1, it'll redirect you to this page here, which will actually explain what's going on. Now this is a project for you. This is a project where you need to develop your own project plan. And there is a template for this. So you've got 2 ways of accessing that template. If I go back to the home screen, you can click on the assessment task 1 template. It's a Word document. I can click on it that way. Depending on web browser, which web browser you're using, it might ask you if you'd like to open it or save it. It might automatically save it for you, depending on how you have your downloads set up. But you will need to open that and use that, so please do use it. The other way is if you're actually looking at the actual assignment page where we were before, this button right here is actually a linkable onto that template. Now the actual task itself, these are the instructions here. It says you will cover the following areas in your submission. And here are the areas: project scope and documentation, stakeholders involved in the project, human resources necessary for the project, cost of the project, budgets, communication strategies, timelines, project management tools that you're going to be using on your project, risk management processes and place, measures of success and review process. These are things that we have talked about in each of the previous webinars. So if you're a little bit unsure in any of these areas, see if you can seek that information out in one of the previous webinars. The good news and the good part is that the template is all you need to do to fill in for this project. Now for this project, I want you to pick something that you would like to be doing. So you can make it up per se, or you can actually use something that you've worked in before and actually write up the actual project plan itself. So I'm gonna start by opening this up. Now this is the first of 3 projects for the project. This is essentially the planning stage of your project. So again, you can make something up yourself, or you can actually refer and use information that you've dealt with a little bit before, but you will need to still be able to draw on some of the things that you would have had to have drawn on through the planning phase, and we'll talk about what happens next on project 2 and on project number 3. Okay, so I'm going to actually open up that template now. We'll actually just be going through that template for today's session and for this one. So I shall open it now, and here it is. So as you can see, a lot of the work's been done for you already here. Here's what you really effectively need to fill in for us. I might just blow this up. I might just zoom in a little bit here. Sorry, I'm having a slow computer day. Okay, so just while the computer tries to respond, what we need you to do is just pop your name on the front page there, put your student ID if you know what that is. If you don't, that's fine. Let's scroll down. There's a table of contents that's already pre-populated for you, so there's nothing that you need to do on that table of contents page. Let's keep scrolling. And here's where you need to start filling in. You'll notice that I've given some explanations on each of these subcategories that we want you to complete. The first part of this project plan is to complete project brief. Now the project brief is this table that sits in front of you. All the categories are already on this table. We need you to put the information here. This is like a brief. It's a 1-page brief that you can give to anybody on the project that will outline all of the details surrounding the actual scope of the project and a summary of what the project includes. After that, so that's sort of section 1, if you like, the project brief. After that, we ask you to explain a little bit more detail about each of the elements that you've actually got on your brief. I'll take you through each of those items once we've gone through the brief. So let's start. First section that you're looking at entering is the project scoping and project brief section. So right here, right underneath that first heading, it says, please write a summary of your project, include elements from your project brief below. So a strategy for this might be to fill in the project brief first, and then all I need you to do is just give me one paragraph, a little summary of all of the details that you've put in your brief. So we'll go through now the elements that you're going to be putting in this brief, and then effectively all the summaries or a scoping summary that you'll be writing is just a one paragraph version of the information that you've placed in that brief. So first is the title. What's the name of your project? So you get to name your project whatever you like. That is completely your creative, whatever you like. There is no right or wrong answer when it comes to a title. The title is something that will appear on correspondence, reports, emails, those sorts of things. So remembering that we're going to be working with a lot of stakeholders on any given project, maybe my only suggestion is make sure that it's not going to offend anybody, or that that's aptly named or appropriately named for the project in and of itself. The next section here is what we call the background or context. So why is the project actually happening? What happened? What was the background? What's the reason for it happening? So I want a bit of an explanation of the background of that project. If there's a refurbishment, or if there's some, aesthetic improvements to a building or something like that, is there a background? Were people complaining about it? Were people getting sick? Was it a health and safety hazard that needed to be addressed? What was the reason why that project's actually happening in the first place? Why are you doing the project? So again, that one's going to be very, very much individual depending on what you've decided for your project. To give you an idea, some of the students in the past have picked things like running a music festival. They've picked things like a renovation or building a bungalow or a house. These are a couple of ideas. If you're having any questions, or if you're not sure on what to do with your project, I suggest you give me a call or we speak together, and what we can do is we can flesh out an idea that makes sense. The idea behind this is that you guys are going to be putting yourselves in the mind of a project manager, i.e. somebody that's in charge and control of the project teams, communicating to everybody on the project teams, monitoring the project, in charge of putting together this brief and whatnot. So I don't mind what the project is, but I want you to be considering yourself as the project manager. Even if you're using an old project that you worked on and you weren't the project manager, I want you to pretend to be. And even if you're talking about a project which is, maybe it's something that you're actually doing. Actually, some students have used renovations and house projects for projects that they've used before. That's okay. That's okay. But you need to remember that you are not the project sponsor here. So we'll get to that in a second, but the project sponsor is somebody who pays for it. I want you to step outside of that person. So if it's your own project, I prefer that you don't consider yourself to be the project sponsor, or just pretend that somebody else is paying for it and that you need to communicate to them on a different level. In any case, we'll get to that. Next section, objective goal. So for this one is, what is the actual aim of the project? So the thing about an objective or a goal is it's usually the tangible thing. It's usually the thing that you're trying to deliver, the deliverables, or what's actually happening on the project. So if we're building, if we're repainting, well, they are the actual goals. That's the end goal. Now, target outcomes, I guess how it differentiates, we've written target outcomes. This could be, benefits, or these are usually your intangible items. I want you not only to identify what the goal of the project is, but I want you to identify things that you may benefit from as a result of the project. So target outcomes, this next one, might be things that what we say are intangible. So it might reflect on a satisfaction level that's increased. It might increase the amount of rent that is gained. Now, that's not the goal. Our goal was to build something, but one of the outcomes is that we might be able to make more profit as a result of this. Usually things like satisfaction levels are things that are, they are benefits that come, or outcomes that come as a result of doing the project, that aren't necessarily the actual intended objective or initial goal of the project, but they are the outcomes as a result. Now, the next section is milestones. You remember, I think in the very first webinar, we talked about using a systematic approach and taking any given project and breaking it down into subsections. Here's what I want you to do. So you're going to take your project and you're going to give me 5 milestones, 5 main parts or times of the project where, yes, we're going to break down this big job into 5 logical chunks, and you're going to list out these chunks for me in that section called milestones. For more information on systematic approach, please do go back to the very first webinar, the resource support webinar number 1. Measured. Next section, you're going to give me 3 ways that you are going to be measuring the success of your project. Now, we've talked about different ways to measure the success of a project. How do we know if we've achieved? And that question should be answered through these 3 measurements that you'll provide here. So just list them. Remember, this is the project brief. You're going to have a chance to explain your selections in a little bit more detail later. So for this section, just give me the dot point. So one of them might be on budget. Okay, so that is one of the ways you're going to measure this. So just list it. Don't give me any more explanation. As long as it makes sense, then that's fine. Okay, so the next one there is reporting requirements. We need to report on our project, where, remember, we are the project manager here. So what I want to know is what are we actually reporting, who and what and how often. So I've written in there the reporting frequency and who's responsible. That's fine, but also tell me what else. So what's actually being reported, who's it being reported to, and presumably you're the one that's going to be reporting because you're the project manager. So reporting requirements, I want to know who you're reporting to and what are you reporting about. Okay. Now, human resources. Here, we just need you to list the actual human resources that are going to be involved in your project. So what are the actual jobs? Internal, external, what are the actual jobs / working groups that are required for this project? It's a little different from the key stakeholders that fall below, because the stakeholders are the groups of people. So who are the key groupings of people? Because usually we'll need to communicate to different groupings of people using a different strategy, because, as we've discovered earlier, they have different needs, they have different expectations. It's important that we communicate to their levels of understanding. So with key stakeholders, I want you to group these jobs. So on your first one, if you've got builders, you might have a painter, a plumber, things like that. But your key stakeholder groups, you might have builders as your key stakeholder group. You might have government officials, or you might have project sponsors, whoever they might be. You might have internal members of the company that need to be dealt with in a different way. But so I want to know the human resources, who are the people, what are the jobs on your project, key stakeholders, the difference here, what are the actual groups of people that we are working with on this project. So that's how they differ. Other resources for that section in the middle, just list off some of the resources like the equipment and materials that you need. So other resources, so resources outside of the human resources. We've got people. We know that resources are people and things. So the human resources, what are the people that we're getting in here on the project? Other resources, what are the things? Now, risks. Remember, we talked a lot about risks in our second session. I want you to identify 5 risks for your project. Just list them here. Don't have to explain them. Just list them here in your brief. Just list them. You will need to provide 5. And yeah, you'll have to use each of the 5 categories that I've provided here for you. So I'll want 1 safety risk, 1 financial risk, 1 operational risk, 1 commercial risk, 1 legal risk. Okay, so 5 from each of those following categories. Jump onto that webinar on risk, project risk and budgeting, I think the second one, and you'll get a bit more information there. Risk management. What I want to know is, what are your strategies for each of those 5 risks? So you've given me the 5 risks. Below that, I just want you to give me a strategy for either mitigating it or removing it completely. Okay, the next one here, I just want you to list some of the guidelines or standards or legislations that surround your project. So are there any particular legislations? And again, just list them here. No great information. Project 3 will ask you for a bit more information on legislation. We'll get to project 3 a bit later. This one, just list any of the bits of legislation that are required on your project. It could be a code of practice if you're doing building. Have a look at things like codes of practice for building or construction. or if there are any guidelines, just some things that need to be adhered to for compliance or for keeping up a standard, or obviously to keep within the law and within the parameters of legislation. So just list them, 2 or 3, absolutely fine on that one. Quality control, just give me a couple of mechanisms or ways that you're going to ensure quality outcomes of your project. So just list a few ways that you're going to ensure that the outcomes of the project remain at a high standard, or remain, well, that you get quality at the end of it. So this is going to really depend on what your project is. So this is a bit of a creative one. I want you to think of ways that you can ensure that you're going to maximize the likelihood of having a quality outcome. So whatever we're trying, whatever our goal is, you'll have to go back and look at what your goal is. Is it to build a brand new house? If that's the case, what are the ways that we can ensure quality on that house, that production? So that's our goal, to create a house. How can we ensure quality in that? So come up with a couple of ways for me. Now, in this section, I just want you to answer each of the what I've actually written a set of instructions under each heading for you. So project documentation, provide a list of project documentation that's required on your project. Have a look in the learning materials for that one. Key stakeholders involved in the project. Now, I want you to explain how each of the stakeholders that you've just identified in your brief, remember you've listed some of the different stakeholder groups in your brief. I want you now to explain how each of those are involved. So just a little bit of detail. This is where you effectively expand on some of the items that you've put in the brief. Definitely you would want to start with your brief, get that filled out first. So fill out the table and then come to this next part to fill these items out here. Human resources, so explain how each of the people are involved. Some of these things are kind of self-explanatory, but that's okay. The cost of the project and budget allocated. So the 2 things I want to know here is how much is allocated, what's the dollars associated with this project. You don't have to give me a budget, you will have to give me a budget in assessment task 2. So assessment tasks 2 and 3 are progressive, or they roll on from this one. So this is the first one, number 2 and number 3, they'll just roll on nicely from this one. So number 2, you'll be giving me a budget. I'll be showing you that in a second. I only want a total dollar amount here. So if it's $250,000 for your project, that's all I want. And I want to know who the project sponsor is. So the project sponsor, what we mean by project sponsor is who's paying for it. Where's the funding coming from? Where's this funding being sourced from? Is it the federal government that's sourcing it? Is it a privatized business? Is it an individual? We need to know as project managers who our project sponsor is. Always. In fact, if I go back to the key stakeholder groups, if I don't see project sponsor as one of your options, I'm going to be handing it back to you. You have to identify the project sponsor as a project manager. The people that are paying for it, they're the ones that we need to give utmost attention to. Now, communication strategies. Okay, so just give me 3 different strategies that you're going to use to communicate, and that could be for anything, whether it's communicating tasks, activities, responsibilities, different messages at different times, whether you're reporting, whatever you're doing. Give me your strategies. Have a look at some of the previous webinars for strategies on communication, or come up with a few of your own if you like. Timelines and deadlines and what have you. Okay, I want a list of action items, a minimum of 10. Now you can either do this in the form of a Gantt chart or action plan checklist. As far as an action plan checklist is concerned, the things that I'm looking for is who is responsible. Sorry, we'll go from the start. The start time, the end time, and who's responsible. So give me a list of things that need to happen on your project. 10 actions, 10 things that actually need to happen, action items. And give me the start and end dates for those action items and who's responsible. So with each action item, you always need to have somebody responsible. I want to see a minimum of 10 here. If people want to try and do a Gantt chart, which is a visual representation of that, no worries. If you're not overly confident to do a Gantt chart or a visual representation, I don't mind if you just give me a list of 10 items, action items, as long as you give me the start, end time, and who's responsible, and obviously a description of the activity. So there's 4 things: description of the activity, start, end, who's responsible. That'll be fine. Okay, so this one, I just want a list of project management tools required on your project. and just a quick explanation as to why you might have chosen it. So 2 or 3 is fine. Just give me a reason why you've picked that one. So if you're picking using a Gantt chart, if you're picking a cost schedule control system or the critical path schedule, tell me about it. If you're, whatever your project management tools are, just tell me why you've actually picked that one. Now the risk management process, here's what I need you to do. I need you to actually insert a table in here and see if I can give you an example of what I'm looking for. All of the items that are in bold are the things that I want you to include as headings on your table. So a risk management process, as we've discovered before in previous sessions, we want to know what the risk is, the likelihood of that risk, the impact of that risk, who or what is affected by that risk. Control measures, what we mean by that is what are we doing to minimize or mitigate that risk, or actually remove it entirely. Who is monitoring? We always have to have somebody responsible for monitoring a risk, and when there's a review date. So I want you to actually create a little table for that. I've actually got one that I've made up here. Let's see if I can find it. I'll have a quick look on my computer for that one. Lots and lots and lots of work files to go through. Let's have a look. Where will I have that one? Maybe risk management template. That looks like it could be a winner. Let's have a look at that one. This is the budget, which I'll take you. Okay, so this is the sort of thing I'm looking for this. I want you to create it on an Excel spreadsheet. It's probably the way to go, or if you could do it on Word, not a problem. Something like this. So remember, you're going to have to give me 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You had 5 risks. You had 5 risks, and you've already given me those control measures in your brief. So you've already given me the description and the measures in your brief. You have to fill in the rest of it here. So the likelihood, the impact, who's affected, who's monitoring that, and the review date. And that's what you need to do for the risk management process, this one here. So just copy and paste it in here, no problems whatsoever. Okay, measures of success, you've got 3 in your project brief. Just explain why you've chosen. So why are these important measures of success on your given project? If the project I had was to put up Christmas decorations in the city, one of the measures of success would be that it's completed before Christmas, because if it's not completed before Christmas, then it's a little bit silly. So I would explain that Christmas decorations are incredibly seasonal. Time is an incredibly important factor in this. Therefore, if the project is not completed on time, the project cannot be considered to be successful, which is why I've chosen time as my measure of success. So that's all we need, that sort of information. And the last one here, review process. I want to know what stakeholder groups or what people are going to be involved in your review process. Any good project manager will always review their project at the end. They'll always aim to include as many of the stakeholder groups in that meeting to be able to gather information, share wins, congratulate people on their journey and the job that they've done, but also learn from things that we could have done a bit better and things like that. So really important part is to review your project at the end. I want to know for this section who, what, and where. So who's going to be coming, what's going to be talked about, and what's going to be the order of the day, so to speak, and where. So where are you actually planning on doing that? Perfect. And that, guys, is assessment task 1. It's one of the bigger ones, but as you can see, if you just follow the pre-populated document that's in front of you, the template, you won't have any problems. Any questions, obviously, just get in touch with me, no problems. Project number 2, or sorry, assessment task number 2, this is a follow-on. So this is a follow-on from assessment task number 1. Now what you need to do in this one is, first part, 500 words. We want to know how you're planning on monitoring and assessing your project that you've just done a brief on. So you've filled in the brief, you know what the project's about, you already know what your measures of success are, you already know what different stakeholders and people are involved in the project. We want to know how you're going to be monitoring and assessing your performance. And so the way to answer this is to actually use each of these as a separate subheading, and then just put your answer underneath. So with project progress, we want to know how you're actually going to be managing the progress, which when we mean progress, we're talking about timelines. So how are you going to keep an eye on the time? So how are you going to be monitoring the progress of your project, that it's actually running on time? So what are ways? So talk about some project management tools that you can use to assist you. Maybe talk about different meetings or different methods of communication that you'll be using to just monitor progress. Performance, the next one. This one, what we're wanting to know is how you're actually going to monitor performance on your project. How are you going to do that? So is there a work breakdown structure involved? Are you going to be looking at project progress reports? Are you going to be setting up KPIs? And if you are setting up KPIs, what are some of your KPIs on your project? So look at the ways that you're measuring your project and tell me how you're actually going to keep an eye on those. We already know if a project will be successful if we do these 3 things that we've already discovered in the previous project. So how are you going to keep an eye on that? So we want to know how you're going to monitor those few things that you've told us. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, communication with team members. This is what I'm actually wanting to know with these 2 per se, is how you're actually going to document that information. So how are you going to keep, so when we say monitoring team meetings and monitoring or coordination of team meetings, in these 2 sections, we want to know how you're going to get people together, but how you're actually going to document that conversation or communication. So have a look at the most common ways that people will document meetings. If you're needing a bit more information, do some research on how to document a meeting, and you'll see there are some good systems out there. So talk about those systems because they're important when it comes to keeping track of conversations that you're having with your team. We call that documenting. So methods of documenting we want to see in these 2, and coordination of team meetings. So how are you actually going to set those team meetings up? Feedback sessions, same goes. So maybe just tell us how those feedback sessions are going to be run, but the second main part of that is how is that going to be documented. So I guess I should have highlighted these 3 sections together. So feedback and meetings, how you can be running feedback sessions, how you're going to be coordinating team meetings, but most importantly, how you're going to be documenting those conversations that you have in those 3 sections. The next one, what actions you'll need to take when milestones are missed. So you can do this one of 2 ways. You can actually pick one of the milestones that you've already listed in your project brief and talk about what you will specifically do if that one's missed. Or you can answer this, probably more preferably, you can answer this quite generically and say, if project milestones are missed, this is what's going to happen. There's going to be an email that's sent, there's going to be a meeting that's run. If you're going to be meeting with people, which is highly advised, or talking to people, coordinating other stakeholders, you'll need to let me know what other stakeholders are involved. So when I say what actions, who are you going to be communicating with? What things are you going to do? You're going to follow it up with an email? How are you going to document those changes? Just tell me, generally speaking, what sort of actions you will be taking if any of these key milestones are missed. Who are you speaking to? How are you going to document those changes? How are you going to coordinate all of that? Same goes with this one. How will you develop a contingency plan? So a contingency plan is something that you put in place prior to a project starting. So when it says how does this fit in with your project plan? Well, you'll do that in the scoping stage of your project. Again, I want to know who's involved, what stakeholders are involved, because as we know, we want to involve a lot of people in our contingency planning process, or the most relevant people. So who is going to be involved and how are you going to put that together? What reporting formats will you use? So you're going to tell me the different types of ways that you're going to be reporting on your progress. Have a look at, there's a section, I think, measuring, reporting and recording progress in your learning materials. Have a look at the different methods of that or reporting. We talked a little bit about it in the last session too, I think. Just have a look, just tell me which ways that you'll plan on actually informing people about whatever's going on. It's hard to say any more about that one. Okay, what procedures you'll set up to communicate to stakeholders in your team? Tell me how you plan on communicating to different stakeholders in your team. Remember, different stakeholders will need different attention, so one size fits all or that sort of approach won't cut it for this. Just show me a few different methodologies of communication or ways that you're going to communicate to different. Actually, for this question, what I'll do, this question here, I actually apologize. These last 2 points are meant to be part of part 2. In fact, I wonder if I can change that right now. What I'll try and do is I'll change this after I get off this webinar, but these last 2 points actually are meant to be in relation to finances. So when it says what procedures you'll set up to communicate to stakeholders, we have already sort of answered that previously. What I want to know is how are you going to communicate on financials? So for this one, tell me, how are you going to report on financials? Only worried about financials for this question. And who? Who are you going to be communicating financial information to? Remember, we're not going to communicate to everybody on a project the details, the nitty-gritty details of finances. In this part, you'll need to tell me who, though, you will be communicating the detailed parts of finances to. The next question here, which again, I'll be popping under part 2. It's under part 2 because it relates to the dollars and cents. So part 2 is just all about the dollars and cents. Part 2, or this one, how will you determine levels of authority and decision-making linked to financials? What we're actually asking here is, who's responsible for making financial decisions? So what's the actual process that people have to go through when it comes to, financial decision making? Is there one person that's responsible for authorizing all payments? Are there a team of people? How does that work? Is there petty cash? Is there a minimum or maximum sort of dollars? So if I am a painter and I break a paintbrush, am I allowed to go and spend $5 on a paintbrush, or do I have to send email? Does it have to get authorized by finance and then authorized by the project manager and sponsors? Or are only certain dollar values requiring authorization? Will there be minimum, is there a certain amount that can be spent without having to escalate it? Just tell me how that works. So that's what we mean by levels of authority in decision making relating to financials. And the only other thing for part 2 that you need to do, so these 2 questions there relate to part 2. And the only other thing you need to do in part 2 is to design a budget for me. We have already done that for you. If you have a look at the front page, you'll see budget for template in assessment task 2. Here it is. And when you click on that, it will open this. I've already designed this for you. What I'm looking to see is around 20 items on here. If you don't put 20 items, I'm guessing you maybe haven't thought hard enough. So 20 items would do. I've given you different categories that you can put. So direct labor, materials, equipment costs, financials. So when we talk about financials, it might be interest on loans. So if we're borrowing money, there's usually an amount of interest that needs to be paid back. Any legal costs. So did we have to get a conveyor out for our property, or was there any solicitors or lawyers involved? And again, it's a budgeted amount, so you may not actually have any lawsuits to deal with, but you might be putting a provisional amount, and you might say, look, we'll put $10,000 aside for our lawyers or for solicitors, as we would not otherwise need ad hoc. And the whole sheet should calculate the total cost for you at the end. There's actually a projected and an actual. You only have to put the projected and it's only the budget, but this is just a handy little template that you can use anyway for any form of budgeting. Okay, so that's assessment task 2. That's done. Now, assessment task 3 is, I'll read it out straight off the screen. This assessment requires you to show how you research relevant legislation linked to your project plan. You will be required to upload evidence of your work in a Word document. When developing your project plan, an important consideration is the relevant legislation and codes from all levels of government that might affect aspects of business operations and therefore your plan. We want you to research these five different categories, if you like, and explain the important part here. It's a 500-word report here, so this is quite a small one. The tricky one is that second one, I guess. That first one, you'll be filling it in. That second one is just showing how you're going to be monitoring, assessing, and reporting and budgets. This third one is just relating to legislation. So the key here is that you'll need to explain how each of these policies impact on your project plan. I want to know how they're going to impact on your particular project. So really what I want you to do is just take each of these 5 categories. It's a 500-word report. So what you're looking at is approximately 100 words for each of those 5 categories. I really just want you to explain in broad terminology what's involved in each of those areas and how therefore that might impact on your project plan. There's a few extra questions here too that you can answer if you like, or answer those right at the start. But really what I'm looking for is these 5 categories, about 100 words for each of those 5 categories. So you'll need to research each of those 5 categories, and then the key is to explain how that may impact on your particular project. So just another real quick recap. Anti-discrimination law or anti-discrimination laws actually include a range of different acts, such as the Sexual Discrimination Act, Racial Discrimination Act, Disability Discrimination Act, the Age Discrimination Act. You can obviously discriminate against somebody based on their age, and there's a few others in there too. What I want to see actually, so I want you to actually talk about those various different acts that fall under that banner. So anti-discrimination is really a category. I want you to discuss some of the different acts that fall in that particular category. So, and look, in Australia, we have obligations under a number of international human rights treaties to actually take measures to eliminate discrimination on the basis of things like, as I mentioned, age, race, sex, marital status, disability, etc. So these laws actually cover it. So whenever you're referring to any of them, whether it's the Age Discrimination Act of 2004, whichever one it is, it's important that you put the year. So under this particular category of anti-discrimination, I might say anti-discrimination laws cover the following areas, blah, 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 blah. Give me the year. I want to know what those acts are, but give me the year for that particular act because they change, and therefore it's actually irrelevant if you've listed the wrong year. So I want you to have a look, make sure you're putting the right year in. And then the second part of that is where you're contextualizing it to your project. So we need to consider these laws when, or why is this relevant to you in your project? So that's how you're going to contextualize it. The next one is codes of practice or compliance codes. Another word for it. So compliance codes actually provide practical guidance to those that have duties or obligations under occupational health and safety acts, and effectively they're guides to provide an easy way to understand information in these complicated laws, but they provide practical ways to actually stay within the law. So these occupational health and safety laws, there's anti-discrimination laws, there's lots of laws out there, but there's not a lot of actual practical guides or ways to, hey, if you do this way, then you'll be safe. And it might be, as an example, usually the first one that comes up when you're actually having a look, if you go to WorkSafe, it's just the Victorian version, worksafe.vic.gov.au, each state has their own, or Safe Work Australia, you'll see there's lists of codes of practices. The first one I think that comes up is the asbestos code of practice. It's actually just safe removal of asbestos. So we know that workplace health and safety and occupational health and safety are there to ensure that we have a safe working environment for our workers. Codes of practice provide guides on how to keep those environments safe. So talk about a little bit about codes of practice, how they fit in, but I want to know how they fit in with your project. So environmental, there's a couple of different acts that are administered by the EPA. Environmental Protection Act of 1970, I want you to research that. There's a few others in around that as well. National Environment Protection Council Act, Pollution of Waters and by Oils and other Substances Act. There's a few that, I think I got that wrong, but there's a few in there, something like that. I want you just to talk, again, holistically, generally speaking about what those acts are about and tell me how they're going to impact you and on your project. Now, workplace health and safety. Previously, workplace health and safety was a state-based thing. So Victoria had their own workplace health and safety law. New South Wales, Western Australia, everybody had their own. Now, what's actually happening as we speak is that Safe Work Australia are actually looking to harmonise all of these state-based legislations and create just one occupational health and safety law. The other way around. Every state had their own occupational health and workplace health and safety. Now aims to harmonise all of those previous occupational health and safety laws that were state-based. And so have a look at safeworkaustralia.gov.au to get information on workplace health and safety. But yeah, again, in essence, it's there to provide a safe work environment for our workers. So talk about how that impacts on your project. Privacy laws. There's a Privacy Act. You'll need to refer to this. I won't give you the year. Have a look. The Privacy Act, you give me the year. It's an Australian law which regulates the handling of personal information about individuals. So that includes the way that we collect information, the way that we use that information store, and disclose personal information. So that's all about what's inclusive in privacy. So have a bit of a look though, do a bit of research, have a look at that one too, and then tell me how that one relates to your particular project. Okay, guys, and that's it. That is the whole of project management all wrapped up and all sorted. So that marks the end of this second subject, project management. We're a quarter of the way through the course now. Our third subject, everything will begin from next week on workforce planning. Keep an eye out for the messages or the emails in reference to the workforce planning webinars. They'll be coming up shortly. And that's all for me today. So thank you very, very much for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, guys.